Well, thank you, Paige, and to our audience today, thank you for inviting Bryan and I into your office or home. And I want to start out with reminding you what Paige said a moment ago. We read the comments you write in the end of session survey. And that's exactly why we're presenting this material today. About a month ago, Bryan and I did our Reserve Studies 102 program that talks about the Reserve Studies financial side. And a lot of you said you wanted to see the application of that theory. And so that's exactly what we're doing today, showing you our thought process, what we go through, and the actual things we do, all to help you more effectively understand and apply the results of our reserve study at your association. Now, this is how we'll divide our time today. I'll start out by laying a bit of introductory foundation before Bryan starts with the demonstration. And part of that introduction is every question about reserve funding starts with expenses. What expenses are we trying to work with here and offset with funding? Well, that reserve deterioration is real and ongoing. It's literally a force of nature. If you stop doing any maintenance, you'll very quickly see the deterioration set in. But fortunately, Mother Nature is very steady, slow and steady, kind of like the tortoise and the hare. And it's the board's job to just keep up with that slow and steady deterioration with the right maintenance at the right time. And that takes money. Many of the expenses at your association are indeed covered by insurance, but I want to make sure that you understand that normal deterioration is not covered by insurance. Insurance is for accidents, not normal aging and deterioration. There's no triggering event like a tree falling or a big hailstorm, so there's no property insurance coverage. And remember that your directors and officers liability insurance is to defend you in the normal course of performing your role as a board member. But if you're not doing your job, and your job is indeed to follow the governing documents, follow the law, and take care of the property, then you shouldn't expect your defense to be funded by the association's D&O policy. You may be kind of hung out to dry on that. And in speaking about your role, I want to talk about home affordability for just a moment. That's not your job as a manager or board member. Your job is to make sure the bills get paid. Individual owners are the ones who make choices about what they can or cannot afford. So your job is to set the assessments where they need to be, and the owners can make their own choice about if they choose to live in the association. And my last comment about your role is to just remind you that if your actions are ever challenged, what you've done will be measured by the 3-part business judgment rule. So you always want to have this in the back of your minds, that you want to be able to demonstrate that you acted such that the association got good quality care, and that you were focused on making sure you were loyal first to the needs of the association before your own personal agenda or pocketbook, and that you reached out for counsel or professional help when you didn't know what to do. So these 3 concepts should be shaping your performance, your execution, your planning about how do you react to, well, what do I do now with reserves and funding reserves at your association? And these are the kind of things that we think about that are in the back of our minds. These are the 4 guiding principles, reserve funding principles found in National Reserve Study standards. And number 1, the funds are to exist when needed. We're trying to set something up that is stable from year to year, not rocking the boat. We're trying to spread out reserve funding evenly and fairly over the years, over the homeowners, and then finally being fundamentally just fiscally responsible. Again, these are the 4 things that are on our minds, just like the 3 business judgment rule elements should always be on your mind. And we'll talk today about funding goals. And the standard measure we're going to use having to do with reserve fund strength is percent funded. Bryan will explain that a little more. But as you can see on this chart on the left side, special assessments are common when the reserves are in the weak 0 to 30% range. Cash flow problems, not enough reserves to do the project that you need to do, and you're pushed into special assessment land. Now, on the other hand, special assessments are rare off on the right when your reserves are in the strong over 70% range. And we'll talk about that again in guiding your associations to a safe place. Why? So you can have sufficient funds to do your projects on time. So we're going back to funding principle number 1. So we'll put these things together. This is how we measure things. This is what we're going to talk about as we move forward. And that brings us to the heart of our program, diving into Bryan's demonstration of how he develops a funding plan. For this part of the program, we're going to use our free online reserve calculator tool called UPlanet. This is the example property. It's a property that Bryan selected from his portfolio of clients in Colorado. Not too old, 47 units, 2 buildings, 3 stories, outside asphalt parking, no particular exotic recreational amenities, pretty straightforward. I think it's a great case. And Bryan, why don't you take it over now and show people what's going on and give them a little inside view to what we do.
Excellent. I will go ahead and do that right now. So as you can see on my screen, this is the home page of our client center when a client logs onto our website to access their documents. So you can see here, this is the dashboard. And if you're a portfolio manager, your portfolio of properties will be here. And so for this example, we're going to select this property here. You can see it lands you on the documents page where you can access the reserve study. It also allows you to send a link to the reserve study. If you want to not have to include an attachment on an email, it will allow you to send a link to anybody and they can download it directly. As you can see also, we have our prior reports that we've done. So it's a historical capture as well. Next, you'll see here user accounts. If you would either like to add a privileged user or just a view-only user, you will have those options to do so that anybody on your board or in your potentially ownership that you would like to have access to these documents will indeed have the ability to do so once you add them. But let's jump over here to the UPlanet tab. UPlanet, again, is our ability or our way to help our clients essentially play in the data that we have provided for them so that they can run their own what-if scenarios. So allow me to increase the size a bit. And as you can see here, UPlanet is broken down into a few different tabs. We have the component listing, which lists all the components at the property. We have the control panel, which allows us to manipulate the inputs into the reserve study. We also have the recommendations, which allows us to make recommendations to our clients in regards to what their next step should be, funding plan overrides, and tables and charts. Also, in addition, each page has a video tutorial, which allows any user to easily understand how to utilize this system because these tutorials are broken down on each and every single tab. So let's start off here, and for the next 15 minutes, we'll go through all of UPlanet for you all, and we'll be able to review some of the questions that we see on a normal basis when putting together reserve studies. So our component list here, as you can see, is broken out into different chapters. So for this particular property, we have the sites and grounds, the building exteriors, building interiors, and mechanical systems. This allows our users, our end users, whether that be a board member or owner, easily understand and access where a specific component is listed. Is it inside the property? Well, it would be under here. The other thing to note too is you'll see some of these assets are grayed out. This may be because we want to disclose to the end user, to the client, that we did indeed see these assets, we counted them. But for example, in this scenario, the trash enclosures are not the association's responsibility. It's actually a neighboring association's responsibility. So we wanted to tell the client we did indeed see those trash enclosures, but we're now disclosing it to maybe an owner or even a future reserve specialist that updates this report that these trash enclosures, though we did count them, they are not the responsibility of this particular HOA. Therefore, it's a non-funded component and it is not funded, as you can see here in this column, not funded. So now that we've reviewed the component list and gone over it briefly, let's take a look quickly at our control panel and the recommendation panel tabs, because this is going to allow us to show you how we're going to make our funding recommendations for our clients. So when we put together
Bryan, can I stop you right there? I think what you're doing is fantastic, because isn't that the same order that you go through when you're preparing a reserve study? Components first, and then you start working on a solution?
That's exactly right. The flow is exactly the right way that we do it. Exactly. We have the components, we do the inputs, and then we make the recommendation exactly like that. And so as you can see here, once we are able to gather the inputs like the starting reserve account balance, we then can make our recommendation. So note here, in our recommendation, our goal is what Robert had mentioned earlier. We are making sure that we follow the 4 funding principles of sufficient cash, stable contribution rates that are evenly distributed and fiscally responsible for all owners, regardless of when they happen to live at a property or how long they live at a property. Each owner is going to be paying a fair share of the ongoing deterioration of those assets. So as you can see here, our goal is to be 100% funded at the end of a 30-year time frame. So that's our recommendation, is to be 100% funded at the end of that 30-year time frame. But what happens if we change some of the inputs? So for example, what if the association has less money in their reserves, right? So let's cut that. Let's just say, because every single association is different and unique, and every single reserve study we do is customized for the particular client we're working with, it's not going to be just a template. So let's just say we're working with a property and they've only got $50,000 in reserves, not that $350,000. What is that going to do to our current recommendations? Well, it's going to put them at a higher risk. So now their percent funded is only 5.2% funded. And as Robert discussed earlier, that puts this client at a high risk of special assessments and deferred maintenance, right? You can see here, they're almost touching zero. And so this is something that we would want to avoid. And so what are we going to have to do in order to avoid this issue? Well, we're going to have to make up the difference. We're probably going to need more cash into the reserves in order to offset that ongoing deterioration. So let's just press this full solver button so that we can see what the recommendation will come out to. So as you can see, it's very different than what we had before. In fact, now we need a special assessment of about $380,000. First of all, as well as an increase into the reserve contributions. So before it was 11,400. Well, we still need about 11,000 into the reserve accounts, plus a special assessment. So it's kind of a double whammy for this particular client. Okay.
Bryan, can you talk through that special assessment? I see a bumping there. What are their expenses like in the future?
So what we can see here, if we go down to the bottom of this page, you can see that they do have some larger expenses in the next 2 years. And that's what's going to require that special assessment. And so another thing that we'll see from clients is they say, well, what if we can't do a special assessment in a single year? And so one of the things we could do is potentially break out the special assessment into 3 separate tranches. And so as you can see here, I'm just inputting the data just like this. I'm going to now press the recalculate button. And you can see we get essentially a similar result, but we've now broken out the special assessment into 3 separate years, not just falling on one set of owners. And it still allows a smoothness of the funding plan, which allows, again, sufficient cash, stable contributions, evenly distributed and fiscally responsible, so that the client can cover these expenses that are coming up. So as we say, there's many ways you could say to skin a cat, in this case, to fund your reserves. Now, Robert, would it be okay if I now showed what would happen if they had an influx of cash? So instead of being $50,000,
we all like that. Yeah.
Okay, excellent. So what if this client, again, actually, let's start off here. I'll just reset this. We go back to where we started so we all can remember. I just press the reset button, and I'll go back here and press the reset button so that everything is reset on each tab. Again, this is our starting point.
So we leave the bad dream and now go into a good dream.
Yes, that's exactly right. So remember, this client is almost 37% funded. Their contribution rate is 11,420. So now we're going to bump this up. Let's just say to 800,000. So they get an influx of almost 500,000 into their reserves. What does our recommendation look like now? Well, they've increased now to over 80% funded. That's a great place to be. And what also is going to happen is you can see we are now overshooting our trajectory of 100% funded. We're now approaching almost 140. So we can press full solver. And we are now able to decrease the reserve contributions for this particular client.
That's a key point there.
Exactly. Isn't that incredible that a well-funded association actually experiences lower payments or lower contributions into the reserve account? It's very, very impressive and very helpful that I don't think a lot of clients realize that when an association is well-funded, it's going to actually be more affordable to live in that association once they achieve that.
And more enjoyable. The property values are maximized. Everything around the association is well taken care of. The carpet is not threadbare. The pool is clean and inviting. The tennis court is playable. A lot of good is going on. It's because they're not in catch-up mode. They're not rapidly trying to increase. They're just able to just stabilize.
That's right. That's right. They're going to be able to just take care of it. It's going to run like a well-oiled machine. So if you don't mind, Robert, if I could just show the different funding targets that we talk about. So
Sure.
Fully funded, threshold funding, and then baseline. And this will take just a few minutes of your time to kind of go through those three different scenarios and exactly what do they mean. So again, I'm going to press the reset button again so we can go back to our original data. So I'll go back here again, press reset, and I'm going to go to our recommendations again. So what if a particular client wants to just put in the bare minimum, meaning how much money can our association put in and just be skating on thin ice, not run out of money? So you could press this baseline solver and you're going to be able to see what the results are. And when you run the data, you can see here that the contribution rate now has decreased to about $8,000 per month for this particular association. So again, this puts the association at, we would say, a much higher risk, because what if one of these costs that we project in the future may end up costing more? Well, now their association is going to be in trouble.
Yeah, no margin.
That's exactly right. There's very little margin for error. And as we know, the future is hard to predict sometimes. And so that's why we wouldn't recommend an association to follow this path, because it does put them at a higher risk, but it is something that they can see and make a decision on.
So they can strategically say, we are going to play close to the line. We take that risk, because if you scroll down like you did earlier, the expenses haven't changed.
Correct.
So there's no magic to contributing 8,000 versus 11,000. It just means that you're like some of those times I'm behind an RV on the freeway and it says we're spending our children's inheritance. They're going towards a leaner future, and they honestly, as you point out, may run out of money if things don't go exactly according to plan.
Well, my parents just bought an RV, so maybe
Oh,
that's what's going on. So yes, but you're exactly right. You're exactly right. So let's reset again, and I'm going to show you that threshold. So threshold, all that means is the board or the association or the manager is going to pick a particular endpoint. So they're going to say, hey, we want to be 50% funded. And so it's important to understand that does not mean 50% of what we recommend, so what we would call fully funding the reserves, but rather 50% target. So let's plug that in, see what that would look like if we can get to about 50% funded. And so as you can see here, if we put in around a little bit above 9,500, we get to around a 50% target. So that again was not half of the fully funding recommendation, but rather that is a 50% goal.
What happens if you put in 50%?
If you were to put in 50% of 11,400, let me just do the math real quick. So that comes up to about 5,700.
Yeah. Crash and burn.
So that's why it's important to understand the words we use. We're not just saying 50% of the recommendation, but rather a goal, a trajectory. And I only have about 2 more points here, Robert, if this is okay. I'm
Sure.
just going to explain real quickly why we recommend 100% funding. Because clients say, well, that's overkill, right? That's too much money to be recommending 100% funded. You're kind of you're not using your funds wisely. It's too conservative. So let me just explain to you, Robert. Let's just say in the future we have a global pandemic and we have supply chain shortages and we have labor shortages, and all of a sudden we see massive increases in costs.
And don't go crazy on me now.
Yeah. So let's just say that happens, right? If that ever were to happen. So we have a $285,000 roof expense that's coming up in 6 years. Now, what if that was a $385,000 expense in the next 6 years? So I'm just changing the component list now. We go to our recommendations, and remember, they used to be at 100% funded. Well, now they're a little bit above 80% funded. So even though the roofing expense was $100,000 more than what we had projected because of potentially some who knows what happens, this client is still safe. They are still what we would call well-funded and in a good position. This cost right here, as you can see, it's a lot higher than what was on the previous sample, previous iteration, excuse me, but yet they are still well-funded. So this is why we recommend 100% funding. We're hedging the future because it is unknown, and we want to get our clients into a healthy range. If the client says, I want to be 50% funded and shoots for that goal, well, now they drop 20 points. They are at what we would call a high risk position, high risk for special assessments and deferred maintenance and other cash flow issues. Does that make sense, Robert?
I like that. Why don't you put those numbers in? Was it 95, 9,800, something like that?
That's right.
And they are dipping down into down to the 30% range a few times, and that's risk of special assessment.
That's right. So you can see here, this is when they drop well below 20%, and that cost is about $500,000. So it is a lot riskier, and that's, again, what we're trying to avoid with a special assessment. Now, the last thing I would like to touch on very briefly, if that's okay, is the question of inflation. So let me go again and reset all of our numbers so we have the original data back up. So inflation has been a hot topic lately because of obviously what we're seeing in the news, and it's real. So we get asked, okay, well, your reserve study is making a recommendation for 3% inflation for our reserve study. That's not adequate. And so what I want to show to you here now is, what does the impact of increasing the inflation by just 1 percentage point have on our contribution rate? So again, here is where we started at. Here's our ending goal, okay? Now, I'm just going to increase inflation by 1 point. As you can see
difference,
here, yeah, they're back to almost that less than 50% funded. So it's not the worst thing ever, but it's, in my opinion, that's extremely significant. Now, if we were to plug in what we're seeing inflation at reported on CPI reports today, I can imagine it looks pretty bad as well.
Crash and burn.
So my point here, Robert, is just to explain that we need to be very careful when changing the inflation and assumptions within the reserve study. By making just a simple 1 point change, it's going to have a massive impact on our overall recommendation for any particular client. So we need to be extremely thoughtful about that, not putting an excess burden on current owners to fund for that when the future will be kind of unknown from that perspective.
Yeah. Can I just add that our goal is not recommendation stability. Our goal is accuracy. And there's a nuance there that we want it to be right. And I just don't see, well, and you can talk a little bit about this. Clearly, we have high inflation right now, and that has meant that you and your team spent a lot more time on that component list, getting all those numbers up to current costs. But I just don't see 8 or 9, 7, 8, 9% for the next 20 or 30 years.
You're right. It's hard for us to actually really know. And so when a client asks me, well, what if inflation goes up even further next year? What we do is we are talking to vendors on a monthly basis. We are talking to vendors actually on a daily basis for a lot of these components now. The best thing that we can do for an association's budget is to be updating their reserve study on an annual basis. That is going to be the best way to make sure that they have proper numbers put aside and proper recommendations for their reserves with updated data, is to be updating that. Because again, last year's reserve study is not accurately reflecting the current costs today.
Yeah, so get the current costs with the updated data in the component list, and then use a normalish inflation value for the next 20, 30 years.
That would be our recommendation. That's correct.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Well, Bryan, is this a good transition point?
I would say so. I don't have anything more to add. So unless is anything else I can point out to you here, I would I'll put the control back in your hands.
Cool. Okay, we'll leave that to reset the values to normal. We may have some questions directly related to you as we get to the Q&A time of this program. Let me take everyone back to where we left off. We introduced the sample. Bryan talked about you plan it, and then he talked about making the choices that we make depending on if the client is well-funded, if they have the 800,000 or the 380,000 or just 50,000. We take the client from where they are and uniquely with their component list, their starting financial information, move them into the future. And there's a lot of factors going on, and I'm glad that we have a team made up of people like Bryan helping our clients. Well, let me bring this in for a landing now. In a big picture, I want to just talk about some big picture items. Typically, what we find are reserve funding needs to be about 25% of an association's budget. We see the range in the 15 to 40%. Most of an association's budget is operating. There are a few surprises, and that's typically operational unknowns, maybe bad debt, but it's very accurate for you to think that reserves should be one of your largest budget line items. And then the CAI Research Foundation came out with this multi-year study in early 2020, talking about how a building ages successfully. It takes 4 things. The characteristics of buildings that do age successfully were associations that updated their reserve study regularly. As Bryan mentioned, getting those current costs, restabilizing the funding plan based on how their starting balance had changed, and then funding reserves as recommended, giving the reserve fund the money it needs, and not for the purpose of just feeling good about things, for the purpose of spending it, having the cash to spend and maintain the building. And then number 4, performing those periodic structural inspections. So if there are any big problems at the association, they get caught early before they become expensive or safety problems. And another reminder, I started out with boards talking about boards not, or they shouldn't, inappropriately pursue the goal of low monthly assessments. We call that fool's gold. No one wins and nothing good comes from pursuing that objective. It's a race where everyone loses. The association doesn't have the money it needs. Projects don't get done. Home values sag. Owner enjoyment goes down. Just a lot of bad things happen when that is one of the goals at the association. And I think you need to appreciate the limits of your power. You have almost no power over reserve expenses. They are going to be a bill that needs to be paid. Your power is limited to choosing how the owners pay. It will be either with through the monthly budget with appropriate reserve funding or special assessments. That's your choice as a board member. It's not if the owners will pay. They're going to get stuck with a roof bill, whether it's all at once after 20 years or if they've paid 20 years worth of little monthly funding that gets them ready for that project. And if you do have an association where the owners are involved in the budget process, if they need to ratify the budget, or if your state laws give the owners power to veto anything, our recommendations are, number 1, start early. Build the message that this is inflation, this is real. Start getting the idea. Well, here we are in July. In your next newsletter, in your next board meeting, say, hey, we're thin on cash. We're barely going to make it through this year. We need an assessment increase next year. Start early. Start with different mediums, the board meeting, the newsletter, the website, everything you can. Maybe even notices on your front door, things like that. And then choose your wording carefully. reserves offset ongoing deterioration. They're not for guesses about things 20 or 30 years in the future. We're always re-updating your current condition. We're always re-updating your current costs. And all the reserve funding does is offset ongoing deterioration so we don't get caught surprised. And if people are saying, this is crazy, this is way too much money, remind them that it's normal. Typical reserve funding is indeed in the range of 25% of total budget. It's just what other associations are doing. If they are not, they are facing special assessments. That's just the truth. And your trump card is remember Surfside. That property had poorly funded reserves. They were behind years of maintenance, and we all saw that tragic collapse. And hopefully we remember that as we move forward. And then the new argument is you can boost your association's FIFO health score by budgeting, having a balanced budget, having an updated reserve study, showing that you're increasing your assessments on a regular basis following inflation. There's a lot of good things that come from having a strong FIFO health score. And if you want to have a resource to help remind you of these kind of issues, in addition to recording of this webinar and the other resources we have a book out there. It's available on Amazon, and I'll include a link to free download of Chapter 1 in the outline for everyone who fills out the online survey. And just a reminder, YouPlanet, it's a great tool. Bryan obviously is well-versed using it, but like he said, there's tutorials on every page. It's an easy online reserve calculator. Just type in a number and click. It's user-friendly. If you make a mistake, you click reset. No big deal. And all calculations are per National Reserve Study standards, so you know what you're getting into. And bottom line is we want you to have success at your association. We're here to be your trusted guide through all the component and funding decisions that come along on your path to the future that we are all on. And if you want to look through our library of articles or videos on our website, of course, go to www.reservestudy.com. And at the top right, you'll see a link where you can order a reserve study proposal for your association. And at the bottom of every page, you can sign up to get notified of future webinars. So you always get exposed to good content like this. And that is my last item. So we're at the end of our prepared content, and I will turn the microphone over to Paige for our Q&A time. Paige.